Let me first say that all these questions are really fascinating. They're great. They're also quite complex. I'm not sure if I'm capable of doing any of them justice. So, let's talk about trauma, then habits, and then teacher students, escapism, possibly. I'll try somehow, if I remember, to inject Hegel in there somewhere. And then the American culture, and perhaps the remedy, which is fasting. That how to overcome anything, you need to abstain from it. Okay. Maybe first I should say a couple of things about fasting. Just in case some of you want to overcome an addiction, whether it's to tobacco or to marijuana or to a trauma, or if you want to overcome basically any habit. I actually don't know what I want to talk about. They all sound so complex. Yeah.
I think that
In the Islamic tradition, and it didn't really come with Islam, it had already existed in Arabia. But specifically talking about the Islamic tradition, 11 months out of the 12, you and I eat, drink, do all sorts of things from the moment we wake up to the time we go to bed. We are connected to the earth, we are nourished by it, we are assaulted by it, habits are created, fears are created, traumas are created. And so this tradition comes about and says, if you examine the contents of your intellect, it all has to do with your physical life. If you examine the contents of your emotions, it has components of your physical life. If you examine the components of your desires, your fears, whatever you can basically imagine, it's founded and rooted in your experience with just everyday life. So once a year, it encourages us, if you can, fast. If you smoke, from the moment the sun comes up to the time that the sun goes down, just don't smoke. If you're addicted to reading books, from the moment the sun comes up to the time the sun goes down, just don't read. If you like to drink coffee, eat food, hang out with your friends, just don't do any of those things. And there is a good amount of, I think, conflict that is created within. It's something you've been doing for the past 11 months or 11 years, and all of a sudden you want to make some changes to your life, but you realize it's so difficult to overcome any habit, whether it's habit to drink coffee, or you look at a man or a woman and it takes you back to the time when someone did something to you that created some very, very strong and intense emotions that later on turn to trauma. So before we can actually talk about the inner components of fasting, let me just focus on the word itself. In Arabic, there are two words for fasting. One is called siyam. The other is called ramez. Siyam means to remain silent or to become quiet. So there are these parts to us. So let me write them down. So for those of you who perhaps may find yourself at a different stage in life and you want to make some changes, you need to understand how these different parts of you work. There is your physical body. There is your emotional body. There is your intellectual body. There is your psychological body, and then there is your spiritual body. Now, imagine you happen to be in a relationship, physically speaking. You have been with your companion for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Emotionally, on the other hand, you don't have a relationship with this person. There is no connection. There are no narratives that bind the two of you together. And though you're physically together, emotionally, you're very, very, very far apart. Okay? Intellectually, you try to bring about certain stories or experiences that can create an emotional relationship. So what you have, you're physically with someone, emotionally you're disconnected, your Messiah, the intellect, comes on and says, can I do anything to put this relationship back into play? Okay. Now, there is going to be a good amount of psychological conflict. Something about you says, no, walk away. Something about you says, no, you can make it work. Just listen to Anthony Robbins. Watch YouTube's given lectures by Jordan Peterson. Okay, listen to Eckhart Tolle. The spiritual is when I asked Andrew if he has a companion, and he had mentioned that he likes to stay a solitary man, it immediately reminded me of Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher. He was engaged to be married to a very, very young, attractive woman. I think he was 95 and she was only 16. I'm just joking, but still. But there was something about Søren Kierkegaard, and remember, it happens usually to those who are introverts, and introverts happen to have, they're relatively short, they're thin, they oftentimes have a very gloomy, pessimistic, realistic approach to life. And just in case you read the writings of, say, Nietzsche, or you read the life story of Jesus Christ, what you need to know is that you can't mimic them, you can't copy them. There is no how-to to these people. They're just born that way. And so Kierkegaard sits down one day and says to himself, I live alone. I have no connection to any other human being. I go into my psychological cave and I think about God. I think about the meaning of my life. And whenever I write, whenever I think, whenever I feel these things, it's as if I am disconnected from the physical life. I'm disconnected from my physical body. I am free to kind of roam or fly to paradise and just roam the Garden of Eden and figure out what lives there. If I was to get married, what's going to happen to me? First, I have to save some money to have a big wedding. Then my wife will tell me, do you love me? What can I say? I have no choice but to say yes, even though I don't really. I am devoted to my soul, not so much to another person. And then she's going to ask me to go to the store and get milk, take her on vacations. And then I'll fall from grace. I will no longer be a solitary man free to think and feel about the spiritual things. I'll be brought back down to earth. And then what is it that the world of Caesar do to all people? You eventually get executed by the responsibilities for which you don't really care, but you have no choice but to oblige. So, let's say that at the age of 10, something happened to your physical body. I remember at the car wash some about 35 years ago or so, there was a librarian who worked in Roseville Library. She was an older woman. She used to come once a week or twice a week, and all of a sudden she disappeared for a couple of years, and then she showed up. And I asked her, where have you been? I thought you were dead or something. She said, no, I was driving on the highway. A car rammed into me. And it has taken me 2 years to overcome the trauma that was created due to the accident. And what she was saying is this. At the age of 10 or at the age of 50, I am sitting in my car. I'm listening to Michael Jackson, dancing in the car. A truck hits me. My car turns over. I flip a few times. I am facing my own death. And all of a sudden I realize my life is incomplete. I have wasted a lot of time. And all of a sudden you realize that you're like the prodigal son, a human being who just goes around, wastes everything. And so she said that every time I went out and saw my car, the first thing I remembered came to my memory was the accident. I didn't want to get close to the car at all. And every time I got close to the car, the experience of the accident came forth. And I had no choice but to crawl back to bed. For 2 years, she said, the only thing I did was sleep in my bed, eat in my bed, and watch movies in my bed. So if, for example, such a person would come to you and say, I want to be like Jesus Christ or Mother Teresa. As a good teacher, first you need to get to know your students really, really well. Then you need to figure out where it is exactly that they're stuck. It may be that you're reading the Bible, but you're not really reading the Bible to salvage your soul. You're reading the Bible to overcome the trauma. Okay? Now, so sometimes if you have a number of friends who smoke and you want to kind of quit smoking, you need to fast. You need to abstain from calling them, seeing them, because they will lead you to temptation and you will continue smoking. You don't want Jesus Christ. You just want someone to smack you, grab your phone and delete all of your contact information. If, for example, you have trauma on the inside, okay, something needs to happen to your physical body. It needs to be put in an environment where first, the emotions you have or the feelings you have repressed for many, many years can first come out. But for those emotions to come out, you need trust. You need comfortability. Okay? You don't need the Bible. You need to fast. And the way you fast is you put your physical body in an environment where you have a support system. Now, your teacher is not simply going to be like a therapist, keep asking you questions so you can relive the experiences that are horrifying for you. What they'll do, for the most part, like a good surgeon, they will cut you. They will open the wound, you have a lot of pain, you'll get to see things, and every time you scream, they'll hold you. They'll support you, they'll protect you. And little by little, as you express these thoughts and emotions, you realize now when you get near your car, it's no longer as horrifying as it used to be. Now you can actually touch the door. Now you can actually open the door. Now you can actually sit in the driver's seat. Now you can actually sit and turn on the ignition. Now you can go maybe just a mile. Maybe you roam around the city. Maybe you go to the highway. It takes time. And the point I'm trying to make is this. Sometimes you need to fast physically. Sometimes you need to fast emotionally. Sometimes, and this is not about you, Kyle, or any one of us in this class who once in a while throw out a big name, such as, can we talk about Plato? Can we talk about Hegel? Can we talk about Kierkegaard? Can we talk about Jesus Christ? Sometimes what you realize is that some intellectual questions are really, really good. Hegel is an enormously important philosopher, thinker. You know, his ideas to some extent shaped Western philosophy, modern Western philosophy. Okay. But when someone asks me such questions, I say, this is America. People are lonely. People are depressed. People smoke all the time, drink all the time. They do therapy all the time. They have trauma within them all the time. What the hell is Hegel going to do to them? So when someone asks me such questions, I say, okay, this person does not need to fast. Okay? They don't need to fast emotionally. What they need to fast is, don't ask questions that don't really belong to you. This is the wrong nourishment for you. Remember, you have no choice. If you want these different 5 parts of you to remain alive, they need nourishment. Okay? Fasting means what? You cut someone from the things that have been feeding them or nourishing them. Why is there trauma? Because you have a certain feeling, you want to overcome it. The problem is those feelings become habitual. You have them all the time. So even though you want to run away from the feeling or just getting rid of them completely, every single morning you wake up, you have this volcano of feeling erupting. And so you get fed by them. And so it's very, very difficult to ever overcoming what they call trauma. So remember, fasting is about looking at a student, figuring out what their habits are, and those habits become an obstacle. Someone who doesn't talk very much, that becomes their habit. What is it that they need to be nourished by to overcome that particular tendency? You go to them, you slap them, you smack them, you punch them, and you say, ask a goddamn question. They go like this, ask a question. And then first they ask, their voice begins to shiver a little. Why? They're nervous. They feel as if they're being judged by other people. They're being judged by themselves. And when they open their mouth to put a few words together, they fumble all over the place. And their task is to keep talking and talking and talking until they get it right. Some people talk too much. So every time their hand goes up and says, I got a question, you look at them and say, shut up. And the point is, what works for one person will not work for another. What is appropriate for one person is not appropriate for another. Which means that every human being cannot but be in a custom-made relationship. When Ray asks a question, he is a 60-some-year-old man. The angst, the fears, the dreads, the curiosities of a 60-year-old man is very, very different than a 20-year-old. So when Ray asks, for example, how do I get into a romantic relationship versus a 20-year-old, well, you're 70. Your body's falling apart. Romanticism for you means someone who has a car who can drive you to Kaiser every day. And while driving to Kaiser, you can hold hands. And then when you go home, you're not going to have great conversations about the Bible or Plato. This woman will cook for you, look at you and say, so, how's your cholesterol? That is a romantic conversation. Okay? Now, there comes a point where someone says, I have lived my life in a physical body. It's been great having a house, a car, this or that. I've had great emotions, some negative, some positive. I've read some books. I have thought some ideas. Okay? I've had a belief system. I've come now to a place where I realize my body, in as much as I wanted to take it to places, there is nothing new to see. I don't want to feel anything anymore. I've felt most of it. I know how things go. You know. Once you've been there and once you've examined something really, really well, they're all the same. For those of you in this class who once in a while exercise intimacy with another human being, ask yourself, what exactly is it that happens? You look at someone, they happen to be someone attractive, you desire them, you become a politician, find a way to get their number, find a way to call them, find ways to speak to them, summon up the courage to ask them on a date, they say yes, you go to a coffee shop, and your intentions become more and more clear. You become obsessed, maybe you'll fall in love, maybe you're just curious, eventually you invite them home, you make food, you play some romantic music in the background like Snoop Dogg or Lil Wayne. You know, you light some candles, and that's enough to do the trick. The both of you will walk to the bedroom, you'll go up and down a few times, and then you say, the hell. And then you want to go back home. Or maybe you just want to get rid of them. And the point is, once you understand that, the moment you pick up the phone to go out with someone on a date, you say, wait a minute, I've been here, I've done that, okay? Once you get to this place, what happens, because most often we are familiar with these four worlds, you have no choice but to get pulled back, okay? And this is where the cultish or the esoteric aspect of your stage comes forth. That you surround yourself with specific types of people. You have a teacher. That teacher protects you from going back to these areas. Okay? And I guess in some way what I'm trying to say is the Muslims who are fasting, because this is the fasting month in the Islamic tradition, that from sunrise to sunset, you don't eat, you don't drink, you don't do anything, really. And if you go to Saudi Arabia, if you go to certain parts of the Middle East, what you realize is that from sunrise to sunset, or perhaps after 12 p.m., all shops are closed. People go home, they sleep, they get up around 4 or 5 or 6 in the afternoon or evening, They have some food, about 20, 30, 40, 50 of them gather, and they break their fast. They eat together. Now, that's a very general and generic way of looking fasting. So remember, Siyam basically means to be quiet. If your body desires something, quiet it down. If you have a trauma that's obstacling your growth, your physical movement, intellectual movement, you need to make it quiet. And there are ways to make it quiet. And you can't do this on your own. It is impossible. Okay? The other name for fasting is called Ramez. Ramez is a baby camel. Now, for those of you who don't know the life of a camel or what a camel is, it's like this gigantic horse. That's really not a horse, but a camel, lives in the desert. Can go without sleep, water, food for about 40 days. And the number 40 is symbolic in most of the religious, philosophical, esoteric traditions. The number 40 is a number for perfection. So, camels usually are used to take stuff from point A to point B. Between point A and point B is a desert. Just in case you want to overcome a trauma, it means the following. Trauma, regardless of what it is and how it came about, feeds you in some shape or form. You are angry. That's nourishment. Anger leads to hate. Should someone call you and say you want to have coffee, you say, get lost. Should your mom say, come and have dinner, you say, I don't feel like it. Should you have an assignment due, you say, I was overcome with all these feelings, I couldn't do it, can I get an extension? The point is, trauma creates meaning. It makes you a victim of sorts. It gives you identity. Now you say you want to overcome it. It means the following. This is trauma, and this, let's just say, is calm or peace. To get there, you have to travel this desert. All the things that used to nourish you here must slowly fall away here. There is nothing that's going to nourish you. You are in the desert. There are no physical nourishment, no intellectual nourishment, which means that you can't go back in time and relive the experience. Because every time you do, emotions are going to flare. And it's going to impact the way you think, you feel, and the way you act. And so in the Quran, which is the Bible of the Muslim world, if you want to fast from anything, it means you will eventually find yourself as a baby camel in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing that can feed you, nourish you. Okay? Now, one of the things you need to understand about the symbolic nature of the sunrise to sunset is the following. For those of you who want to overcome anything in life, you need to understand this very, very basic principle. You are able to come to class, you're able to raise your hand and ask questions, you're able to have fantasies, desires, imaginations for one simple reason. Your belly is full. You have energy. Food turns into sugar. It nourishes you. It gives you energy. If you want to have no thoughts, if you want to have no feelings, no emotions, starve your body. And there comes a point where you realize you have no energy to think, to talk, to imagine, to desire. That's what fasting is. It means fasting forces you, forces your body to disconnect from all things that used to nourish you. Just give it a shot. Don't eat for 10 hours and see what happens to all of your dreams. Remember, to desire anything, you need energy, you need fuel. And if your system doesn't have fuel, there is nowhere to go, you're stuck. I'll tell you a story. I am by nature an introvert. I, very much like Ray and Andrew, I'm a solitary man. When I was 19, very much like some of you in this class, I was confused, to some extent maybe even depressed. I didn't like school. I had lots of friends, and that's what introverts really do. They have something about them that pulls people towards them. Then one day I go to a gathering and there was this man. I had never seen him. He was the first guy who opened a Persian shop in Sacramento. And since I have a sweet tooth, I asked him, do you have ice cream, Persian ice cream? He says, oh yeah, we have pastani, we have falude. So I went and paid him a visit, not because I liked him, but because I wanted to get some ice cream. And then at a certain point, before I was leaving, he says, you know, we have gatherings, we talk about politics and religion once or twice a week. Should you and your father desire, you're welcome. So I went there. And after 6 or 7 months of just going and sitting in his apartment, he had a 2-bedroom with his wife way back then. His wife is an artist. He passed away a couple of years ago due to cancer. His wife teaches Renaissance art and Islamic art and all those things. And so after 6 or 7 months of being at his house and talking about this and that, all of a sudden I come to realize that, you know, he is a really, really interesting man. If it wasn't for him, I would probably be homeless. If it wasn't for him, I'd probably end up in prison somewhere because I like to steal things. I still do. And then I remember him telling me, Amir, you know, when we have gatherings, if I tell you to go and dance, you should just do it. If I look at you and say you should talk, you should just do it. And I was a student for about 10 years, and then we were friends for about 30. But while I was a student of his, every time there was a gathering and he asked me to dance, I said no. And then I had all these degrees under my belt and I went to interviews. Introverts don't like to talk about themselves too much. They're shy, they're reserved. And so when I go to interviews, the first thing that the panel would ask, tell us about you. Well, if you happen to come from my tradition, we don't really talk about ourselves. So I will look at the committee and say, my name is Amir, I have these degrees. Is there more you want to say? No, I mean, you can just look at my resume. I wasn't able to overcome certain tendencies, and those tendencies eventually paralyzed me during interviews. I could have gotten a job when I was 25 or 26 or 27, but no, because I was accustomed to a certain way of being, certain habits. They became an obstacle. So I couldn't land a job until I was like 90. به می سجاده رنگین کن گرد پیر مغان گوید که سالک با خبر نبود ز راه و رسم منزلها. If you have a teacher, and you need to understand what it means to have a teacher. When someone emails me and says, I'm your student, I say, no, you've just enrolled in a class, you're not my student. First, it takes time to get to know someone. Then it takes time to like them. Then it takes time, once you like them, to trust them and to feel comfortable with them. Then it takes time and a little bit of a shock to come to realize, no, you don't just like them, you love them. And once you love them, something really interesting happens. You relinquish all of your physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual powers. You say, what he says goes. به می سجاده رنگین کن. If you are a Muslim and you come to me and you say, can we talk about so-and-so? I look at you, I ask you some questions, I say, no, we're not going to talk about so-and-so, we're going to tackle this, and you have to be okay with it. If you're a Muslim and this is your month of fasting, and I come to realize that fasting really is no good for you, what you need to do is to come to my house and eat food with me. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It means that you have to fast from the belief that you are a Muslim, that you need to fast. That if a teacher asks you to do something, you do it without question, complete faith. Now, this particular narrative does not exist in the Western tradition.